At the southern tip of San Francisco Bay sits a sprawling 24,000 square foot Victorian mansion. And surprisingly, for nearly 38 years straight, this house was under constant construction. And despite work taking nearly half a century to complete, crews were working around the clock, meaning construction operated 24/7 for a mansion that didn't even have a blueprint. And here's the thing, behind its ornate facade is a baffling network of 160 rooms, crisscrossed by staircases rising directly into flat ceilings, doors opening into 30-foot drops, and internal windows looking straight into dark hallways. Yet, even though this building is essentially a real-life nightmare, it has some remarkable features. There are gas-powered German chandeliers, priceless Tiffany stained glass, intentionally installed where natural sunlight could never reach it. And then there are those winding staircases with 2-inch risers designed so that a woman crippled by severe rheumatoid arthritis could navigate her own home. A feature of the home that touches on something rather controversial, as apparently no one knows whether or not this creation is the result of crazy genius or a woman who was struggling with mental illness. So how did a widowed Harris end up spending $1,000 a day on a 38-year building spree that made no sense? And where do all of those staircases to nowhere really lead? Stay tuned to find out as we uncover the history of California's Winchester Mystery House. I'm your host, Ryan Socash, and you're watching It's History. Let's go back to 1839, when a woman named Sarah Lockwood Pardee was born to a wealthy wood craftsman. By early adulthood, she was highly educated, fluent in 4 languages, and by some counts, considered to be one of the most brilliant minds in New Haven society. And by the height of the American Civil War, Sarah married William Winchester, the heir to the Winchester Repeating Arms Company. For context, the company had revolutionized warfare with its lever-action rifle, earning a reputation as the gun that won the West. And I'm sure you've all heard that name before, so it's probably not hard to appreciate the staggering type of wealth that came along with marrying into that brand name. So for a time, young Sarah seemed to have it all. But in 1866, just weeks after giving birth to their daughter Annie, the child tragically passed away from malnutrition. From that point forward, Sarah was plunged into a deep, paralyzing depression from which she never truly recovered. And the couple would never have another child. Then, just 15 years later, another disaster struck. In March of 1881, her husband William died of tuberculosis at just 43 years old. This is where Sarah inherited nearly half the shares of Winchester and a fortune of $20 million, equivalent to roughly $600 million today. At the age of 42, she was suddenly one of the wealthiest women on earth, but in this case, money really couldn't buy her happiness. She was entirely alone, heartbroken, and suffering from arthritis. And so, poor Sarah needed a fresh start. On the advice of her physician and family, she headed west to California in search of a warmer, more delicate climate. By 1886, she arrived to Santa Clara Valley and bought an unfinished 8-room Victorian farmhouse on 40 acres of land, previously owned by a local doctor. And it's here that this tragic story gets fascinating. You see, Sarah didn't hire a master architect or submit blueprints to finish the house. Rather, she hired a permanent crew of local carpenters and began sketching continuous expansion plans on scrap paper, napkins, and tablecloths. And considering the rapid rate of construction with no plans, it didn't take long for the public to notice that something was off. Hence, rumors began circulating that the woman was mad. One newspaper from 1895 claimed that a spiritual medium in Boston advised Sarah on the construction. And according to that highly improbable legend, the spirits of everyone killed by Winchester rifles had placed a curse on her family. The medium claimed that the only way to escape their wrath was to build continuously. So the theory was basically that if the sound of the hammers ever stopped, Sarah would die, in light of all the people who died from rifles. Either way, regardless of the fact that we will never truly know what was driving Sarah, the result of her creation was absolute mayhem. For years, work ran 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Room after room was tacked on with seemingly zero logic. And before long, that modest 8-room farmhouse was expanding into a towering 7-story Victorian Gothic horror show. By 1906, the villa had morphed to over 24,000 square feet, yet it wouldn't stay in that condition for long. On the morning of April the 18th, the Great San Francisco earthquake collapsed the top 3 stories of the mansion, including the iconic observation tower. Sarah herself was trapped inside her bedroom, the Daisy Room, after the doorframe jammed shut. Interpreting the disaster as a warning, Sarah made another radical decision. She ordered the collapsed top floors demolished rather than rebuilt. She capped the chimneys and permanently boarded up the front 30 rooms of the mansion. From that point forward, construction shifted inward, focusing on stabilization and more increasingly bizarre quirks. Notable features enhanced in that time frame include the grand ballroom, constructed almost entirely without using any nails. Rather, carpenters embraced the tongue and groove joint fittings. This space features exotic rosewood paneling and a custom German chandelier with 13 gas burners. Down the hall sits the famous spiderweb Tiffany window, a custom stained glass piece designed to catch light and cast brilliant patterns. Yet it's installed in an interior hallway with zero sunlight. Then there are the mechanical marvels, custom staircases with tiny 2-inch risers designed so Sarah could climb floors despite her illness. There's also forced air heating, 3 hydraulic elevators, and it doesn't stop there. You'll even find fireplaces connected to fuses that terminate abruptly inside the ceiling, staircases that climb 44 steps across 7 turnarounds, only to end abruptly at the ceiling. Anyhow, following the earthquake, things went on this way for yet another 16 years, though at a much slower pace as Sarah spent more time at her other estate. In the end, Sarah Winchester passed away on September the 5th, 1922, in her sleep at the age of 83 from congestive heart failure. And just like that, the carpenters dropped their tools and walked away forever. And I mean it, they really just left the construction site. To this day, you can still see raw lumber stacked in the hallways and half-hammered nails left sticking out of the walls. Which does make me wonder if these guys were not simply taking advantage of a woman in failing health. You know, egging her on as contractors sometimes do. Whatever the case, in her 13-part will, she left personal belongings to her favorite niece, Daisy, but made absolutely no mention of the mansion's purpose. The document effectively dismissed this massive estate as simple real estate to be liquidated. Apparently, movers spent 6 weeks clearing out her possessions, hauling away 8 truckloads a day. Within months, the house was leased to local investors and open to the public as a bizarre roadside attraction, which leaves us with the ultimate unanswered question. Why did she build this madhouse? Putting aside the legends for a moment, historians and scholars have spent decades piecing together a far more pragmatic theory, or theories about what was actually happening behind the chaos. And rather than talking more about legends or ghost stories, I'd like us to focus on the more likely reason she built an estate in such a seemingly crazy manner. And I'd like to reemphasize here that Sarah was always known to be extremely intelligent, so there very well may have been a big picture reason that the public never considers. One prominent theory revolves around simple financial utility and tax strategy. As a major shareholder in Winchester Repeating Arms, Sarah received an amazing tax-free income. So some have suggested that pouring endless funds into continuous residential construction and employing local laborers may have been an effective way to create tax write-offs, but it wasn't the case. You see, income tax did not exist in the US when Sarah inherited that fortune in 1881, or when building peaked. And just to get specific, it was the 16th Amendment that established federal income tax, and that wasn't ratified until 1913. So something like claiming continuous construction as a tax write-off is pretty much historically inaccurate. Which leads us to another theory, philanthropy. You see, Sarah employed many local trade workers, and perhaps in an era before modern welfare programs, keeping hundreds of carpenters and tradesmen steadily employed for decades could have been viewed as a form of charity. And there's a little bit of credence to this theory as others point to her background. Remember, Sarah's father was a master woodworker, and she grew up surrounded by high-end craftsmanship, architectural design, and industrial drafting. Having lost her husband, her child, and her social circle, the continuous construction may have been a way for her to reconnect with her past and a therapeutic hobby. And then, finally, we have the medical reality. Sarah suffered from severe arthritis. The low step, easy rider staircases, and the custom size of her rooms made her house a custom-built physical therapy area with places to exercise, though this theory seems a bit far out. And let us not forget about that 1906 earthquake. And just to recap here, before the earthquake, this was a 7-story Victorian, but when the top 3 stories collapsed, Sarah just ordered the debris to be cleared, carpenters to cap the chimney, and seal off the ruined part of the house entirely, meaning the staircases that once led to upper floors suddenly terminated into flat ceilings. External doors that once opened onto grand balconies were suddenly floating 30 feet in midair because the balconies underneath them had collapsed and were never replaced. In short, many of the mansion's famous ghost traps or architectural dead ends were not supernatural mazes. Rather, they were structural scars of a natural disaster left unfixed. But it doesn't really matter. Regardless of Sarah's true motivations, the legacy of California's Mystery House, and the mythos built around it, has cemented this architecture deep within American pop culture. When John and Mae Brown opened the estate to the public in June of 23, they didn't just market a house. They launched a permanent fixture of Americana. It has since been designated as a California Historical Landmark and listed on the National Register of Historic Places since 1974. This home has inspired countless horror films, graphic novels, video games, and haunted houses across media. I'd go as far as saying that it stands as the quintessential template for the haunted labyrinth mansion in modern mythology. And there's credence to that idea, as this architecture has drawn millions from around the world to come and marvel at its beauty. Which is all to say that, in the end, Sarah Winchester created something unique, a structure that outlived her by over a century. We'll leave it there for today, but a special thanks to everyone who submitted this topic in the community section, as well as the YouTube channel members who make episodes like this possible. I'm actually in the process of opening the archive, releasing tons of on-scene footage over in the members area, so if you'd like to have a fun way to support the channel and see something new, please consider clicking that join button. Otherwise, as always, this is Ryan Socash, signing off.